I think as parents, you expect to be listened to and obeyed. Just because your kid is not doing that doesn't mean that they're just being difficult. It was easier to have a conversation about how this wouldn't be a fight. How do we want to do it? Basically, and coming up with systems that worked for both of us instead of making it a fight.
Welcome to Startup Dad, the podcast where we dive deep into the lives of dads who are also leaders in the world of startups and business. I'm your host, Adam Fishman. In today's episode, I'm joined by Chad Pytel. He's the founder and CEO of thoughtbot, which partners with companies to help them build and develop new products. He's also the co-founder of a media company called 12-Sided Studios and the host of a very hilariously named podcast, which you'll learn about on today's show. He's a husband and the father of 2 teenagers. We talked about why he started a second company and how his kids are getting involved, whether the teenage years are really all that bad, how to prioritize the small things when time passes so quickly, and his contrarian opinions on Screentime. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to Startup Dad on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple. I hope you enjoy today's conversation with Chad Pytel. Welcome, Chad Pytel, to Startup Dad. Chad, I'm stoked to have you on the show today. Thank you for joining me.
I'm stoked to be here.
And a big thank you to Carla Nomberg, Webby honoree winner on this pod, for introducing the two of us. So you two are longtime friends, is that right?
Yeah, we actually live sort of across the street from each other. So yes, we go way back.
You're both manning the neighborhood watch for
yes.
the neighborhood. Okay, good. Before we jump in and talk about fatherhood, you have a podcast with a very cool name, and I wanted to ask you about it. And that name is, I don't want to miss it here, so I'm going to read it. Giant Robots Smashing into Other Giant Robots. Tell me about your podcast, which we will link to because we have to. It's required.
So on the show, I start, and there's 2 other co-hosts as well. We talk with people who are working on products, building products, working at companies. So with the design, development, and business of great products is how we talk about it. It's very conversational. We talk about things like founding stories, challenges people have building or growing companies or products. We've also, in the last 4 months or so, also started to have what we're calling Giant Robots Unplugged, where it's actually just the 3 hosts. And we chat about projects we're working on, life stuff. We just recorded an episode where we went over our work setups and our desks and the equipment we use. So it's a variety of different things. But if you're in technology, you'll probably find the show interesting. And you can check it out at podcast.thoughtbot.com.
So it actually has nothing to do with giant robots smashing into other giant robots.
No, the story about that name is sort of funny because one of the co-founders of thoughtbot had a band. We went to school together. The band performed, I think, once or twice, but that band's name was Giant Robots Smashing into Other Giant Robots. And then when we founded the company together, we like to have fun, and I think that's important. Is like professional but fun. We were thinking about a name for our blog, and we were like, can we reuse that name? Because that was a good name. It's too bad it went to waste being just on that band. So we did. We named our blog Giant Robots Smashing into Other Giant Robots. And then when we started a podcast, and the podcast has been going for about 12 years now, we called it the Giant Robots Smashing into Other Giant Robots podcast.
Amazing. Somewhere there is a band t-shirt with that name on it with a tour date, with one tour date, right?
With one date. Quadfest 2001 or something like that.
Awesome. 2 follow-ups for that one. One is I am really excited to hear the episode about the desk setups because I've been thinking about giving my home office a little zhuzh. That's a technical term. And then the second, so that's just more of a comment. And then what has been your favorite product that you've talked about on that show so far?
Top of mind is I just had the president of the American Society on Aging on the show. And we actually talked about a few different products in that space. And I just found it really interesting because we all get old eventually.
Yep.
We all have people who are older. And it's a space where there's just so much to learn and so much impact that you can have. And so I found that episode really educational for myself. There's a lot of, especially artificial intelligence, there's a lot of companies now that are moving into the space with the goal of like providing companionship and everything. Because if you're at all familiar with the space, you might have heard about like the loneliness epidemic, that kind of thing. So there are people really hoping to improve that with the use of artificial intelligence. I'm a little skeptical personally myself, but talking about it was really educational.
Yeah. I'm probably more skeptical for like younger people using AI as a companion. I think that maybe keeps you from experiencing the real world. An old person, whatever. It's just also like you want to eat like a triple cheeseburger and you're 80, right. Like totally fine. You've lived a great life. If you want to have a make-believe sunset companion, great. But I'll have to listen to that episode too. That sounds fascinating. So the other thing that you've done, in addition to being a longtime founder of a podcast, of thoughtbot, your company, is that you started a gaming and production company pretty recently. You described it to me as an extracurricular project. So I'm curious, what was the motivation behind that project?
Well, I've been playing role-playing games. I'm a big board game fan. It's a big thing that we do as a family, or we did more when the kids were smaller. But I also, in addition to computer science, have a degree in theater and production. And I had sort of put that on the shelf for a while. And so when I met my co-founder at the studio, Jasper William Cartwright, and we became friends and we started to talk about the ideas that we had for what we could bring to productions in the space, started to get really excited about being able to blend not only my performance production background with my love of things like Dungeons and Dragons and gaming, but then also bring my technical expertise to the table as well. And so we've done a few different things, but the big thing is having an entirely green screen studio where the players are sitting as they play the games and building 3D virtual environments around them that are rendered in real time around them on camera. It's a little bit like the Star Wars volume that Disney has created, but for even bigger nerds and Star Wars nerds.
That sounds so cool. And your kids they may not play board games as much anymore, but they're into the production company. They're very supportive of your...
They're very supportive. I have an on-air light up in the corner of my office that my son got me for Father's Day. It's like, you're starting this. And it was a really thoughtful gift. In the space of role-playing games, and there's what is called actual play shows, where it's basically radio drama. People are playing D&D in their characters. It's recorded either on video or audio only. And there's some really popular shows in the space, Dimension 20, Critical Role. And they actually listened to some of those shows even before I did.
Oh, cool.
And so now that I've gotten in the space and we've produced shows on Critical Role, we've worked with and had casts of people who are on Dimension 20, I get to be a little famous for them. And so they're very supportive of that.
That's cool. It's like nerd famous, right?
Yeah, it's nerd famous.
I love that. So speaking of your kids, you have two teenagers, 14-year-old and a 16-year-old. And I have to ask, how bad are the teenage years?
I don't want to lead people astray, but I think we've gotten pretty lucky. They're both very responsible. There hasn't been any huge problems yet. Now, that probably means there will be a huge problem.
Yeah.
The biggest issue for us has been our 14-year-old and just the level of responsibility and self-organization that you need as you go into middle school and high school. Was a little bit of a challenge for them. We've had to work with them to really manage that. But they've also really made tremendous progress over the last couple of years, to the point where they are self-managing most of that. They just finished 8th grade with straight A's, which is just, from where we were a few years ago, remarkable. I think the biggest change, though, in the house is it's like they come home, they go in their rooms and they close the doors until dinner time. Like I was saying, we used to, when they were a little bit younger, every evening we, have dinner and then maybe play a board game, those kinds of things. They have so much work and homework that after dinner they have to go do that and then also talk with friends.
You have no idea how much homework is happening versus how much talk with friends is happening.
Yeah, it's getting done.
Yeah.
As evidenced by the grades. Although that is one difference between my wife and I. I tend to be a little bit more relaxed about that sort of thing than she does.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned your 14-year-old and the executive functioning organization stuff. We have a 13-year-old, almost 13-year-old, and had that same kind of discussion with her, kind of got her going. And then now she's more annoyed when we check in with her. She's like, I got this. And clearly does, So it's one of those things, that transition. They're like, oh, wow, you actually do know what you're doing now. Amazing.
And our 16-year-old got a job and is really into cars and really wanted the independence of having a car. So he just got his license, has been working a job for a few minutes, and the summer has been good because he's been able to basically double his hours. So he just bought a beater for $1,700 on his own. Had to go through the license and the registration process and go to the DMV by himself and wait in line and do all that stuff himself. I'm both proud and terrified.
How was the teaching the driving process? Who was in charge of that in your household, and how white knuckled were you or your wife in the car?
It was me, just around parking lots and that kind of thing. I worked very hard not to be nervous, but he made it okay because he was so motivated and it's just his thing. We're fortunate that there's actually automotive classes, not driving, they have a garage at the high school here. So
cool.
2 days a week, he works in that garage as part of a class that he takes for automotive repair. And so he was very motivated to drive. And so I was able to get him to the point where he was doing that. And then he took driver's ed lessons and driving. So someone else was doing that.
Yeah, very cool. I feel like the car class, the mechanics class in school is a disappearing art. But I love to hear that exists. One of the things that AI will probably not take from us is the ability to repair a car.
It's true, although electric vehicles are completely different. They actually don't really teach any of that in the class because they just don't have the experience and the equipment to be able to do it. So it's more people bringing their traditional cars into the shop to be fixed.
One thing that you have discovered is that your two kids are very different from one another. How long did it take you to come to that realization?
It was a difficult realization. It didn't take long because it was unavoidable. And I don't know if everyone goes through this situation. Maybe some people have kids that are more similar, but Noah was first and he was relaxed, didn't cry a lot, that kind of thing. He would go along with the flow. And Eden, from basically day one, it was clear that they had strong opinions about everything and were much more vocal. So it was obvious from day one, pretty much, that they were very different people. And that personality has carried forward their whole life. They just often have a vision for how things should be, whether that be the play or the art piece or the way that people sit around the table at dinner time. And they, are very strong-willed. It's been challenging, but we didn't always get this right, to be perfectly honest. But recognizing what their personality was and adjusting so that everything wasn't always a fight was important.
So you mentioned not getting it right. What would you say, a mistake that you made along the way? If you could help another parent maybe avoid that same mistake themselves, what would you tell them?
Well, I think as parents, you expect to be listened to and obeyed. So you might also have an idea of how things should work, how getting out of the house should work, how getting ready for school or getting ready for bed should work. And just because your kid is not doing that doesn't mean that they're just being difficult. For Eden, it was they had another vision, and it was really difficult before they were verbal. Once they were verbal, it was easier to have a conversation about how this wouldn't be a fight. How do we want to do it, basically, and coming up with systems that worked for both of us instead of making it a fight.
Everyone's collaborating on the system, right? So it's more of a partnership than a do this. No, I don't want to do that.
Yeah. What we found was making Eden part of the process, whether that be being like, okay, we've got to do some chores around the house. How do we want to do it? Some families do chore charts. We laid out a bunch of ideas, but made them part of the process of how it was going to work. The expectation was it was going to happen. Let's collaborate on how it's going to work.
Right. The end result is non-negotiable, but how we get there, some flexibility. So your kids are now in their formative high school years, right? At 14 and 16. Does it feel like that time has gone by really, really fast?
It does. And I feel like people always say that. And now we expect that both of them will go off to college. And so to be 2 years away from that for Noah and just for Eden, it's like, whoa, where did it go? And now the time is like go by so quickly, even more so. There's less time ahead of us with them in the house than there is behind us. And that is just remarkable.
Yeah. You've developed this philosophy, I'll call it, because of that fleeting nature of time, that is, even the small things matter a lot. You told me that in our run up to this show. And I'm curious, what are some of the quote unquote small things that you prioritized when they were going up? And if you could go back and do it again, what are some of the small things that you would focus more on?
One thing that was really important to my wife, Rachel, and I was to always have dinner together whenever possible. And at the time, I worked in downtown Boston, needed to take the train home every day. So leaving promptly at 5 in order to get home for dinner time at around 6 was key. And so I actually set an alarm on my phone, but rather than just having the alarm, I recorded the kids saying, "Time to go home, Daddy," on the phone, and set that as the audio for the alarm.
Yeah.
Not only did it work, but it especially worked because if that alarm went off when I was like in a meeting with other people or whatever, they were just like, "Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Gotta go."
No arguing with the kids.
No arguments.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Don't be perceived as the jerk that's like, no, can we finish this meeting right now? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that is something I wouldn't do differently. That was what worked really well, was very important to us. It was great to set up that expectation because it carries forward to this day, even with the kids being teenagers and wanting to do things with friends or whatever. The default expectation is that we'll have dinner together. And there are exceptions, but it's a big one.
That's really nice. And also dinner seems like one of the first things to go, right, as the kids get busier. So you had your kids in the earlier part of starting your company, maybe first 3 to 5 years or so?
So thoughtbot's in its 23rd year now. So we were pretty well underway when we had kids.
I don't know how big thoughtbot was at the time, so maybe 7 years into life. But how did you set up or modify the company and this sort of culture and expectations to make sure that you could be home for dinner, be a present dad, like pay attention to the small things? Because I imagine it's easy. You were in kind of like a client service relationship. Like it's probably pretty easy for other people's expectations to dominate your day-to-day.
Yeah, there were a few key things, but from day one, there's this practice in software development. It's not rocket science. It's just called sustainable pace, and not everyone does it. The way I sort of liken it is like every once in a while we'll work with a client who they're not used to working this way. The way that they see things getting done or that they see progress being made is because everyone is frantic and they're not used to an environment where things are getting done, but it looks like everyone's taking it super chill. And the analogy I use and usually it resonates with people, is like when you see a professional sports team, they're not panicked, right? If they're looking panicked, something is wrong. They show up and they're there to win every game, but they make it look easy. They know what they're doing. They're professionals. And that's the way that we carry ourselves. And so that usually resonates with people. And so working with a sustainable pace from day one was key. But we were a company of a bunch of pretty young people. And so most of us didn't even have partners when we were starting the company or working on so layering that on was really important to make adjustments over time. And the biggest one we made was adjusting the way that we did client work. We work primarily with clients only 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday typically. And the fifth day is what we call investment time. And that's time for working on improving the company, our community, and ourselves. So learning new things, creating open source, blogging, writing, and community, volunteering, running events. And so because what was happening was as we started growing families and having other commitments outside of work, we had to come to grips with the fact that these things that were important to us, if we were honest, they were happening on nights and weekends, and that was no longer an option. So we needed to carve out time during the week to make it happen.
Yeah, when you're young, unencumbered or unattached, you can work all through the week and then, we'll just write that blog Saturday morning, or Sunday afternoon or whatever, because nobody needs anything from you, right? But that goes out the window when you have a family.
The other thing was, I remember distinctly my mindset changed. Some people view this as a negative term, but I don't view it largely negative. Is like a lifestyle company where you're creating a company primarily so that you and the people who work there can make a great living, be supported, that kind of thing. You're not doing it to have some outsized return for investors, someone, external. That's really what the definition of a lifestyle company is. And that's not inherently bad. But that also meant that I was like content to reinvest the most of the profits and everything back into the company and not make a ton of money myself or whatever. Something flipped in me once we had kids. And I was no longer just responsible for supporting myself or Rachel. It was like this intense, protective, I don't know, it was a weird feeling.
Yeah, the dad instinct.
Yeah. But that was when we for example, we had a commission plan for people who did sales, but I never took commission. I was like, no, I'm going to start taking commission. Like there was little things like that flipped in my brain once I had kids.
Yeah. Just this, it's interesting that this sort of like instinct or emotion or some chemical thing changed in you that was like, no, now I do have to earn. I can't just eat ramen. The kids can't eat ramen every day. I had somebody on the show and he talked about his philosophy is, nannies don't take stock options. He was like, no, I actually need to be paid in real paper money so that I can put food on the table and stuff like that. So if you could rewind the clock to a time right before your oldest was born, do you have any advice you would give the younger version of yourself?
We live in a world where parents put on a lot of responsibility for themselves of like, am I getting this right? And don't get me wrong, your life completely changes when you have kids. But I found it liberating to realize that millions of people for thousands of years have been having kids, and mostly it comes out all right. They know what to do. And I think that comes into play not only when you have this like bundle of new life and you're worried that you're going to break it. I remember being so gentle with our newborn and then going in, the nurse took Noah to get like a bath and was like, just like manhandling him. And I was like, I guess he's a lot less fragile than I realized. Whether it be literal or metaphorical, I think that's true with kids in general.
Yeah. I like to tell people that kids are made of rubber, even though we don't know that in the beginning. So, well, I want to talk about frameworks for a couple minutes. And I think you mentioned to me as we were preparing for this show that your frameworks, I like to ask people about this, but you said your frameworks kind of have changed as the kids have gotten older. So what did you prioritize, or how did you think about it when they were younger, and sort of what's different now that they're more independent in the high school years?
Big part was making them part of the process of figuring out how we were going to get through the day. I was responsible for the morning situated breakfast, getting them off to school or daycare. We had this whole system of we needed to leave by a certain time in order to get there. So if we can get ready before then you can watch what we were calling picture songs, which that's what the kids called them, but they were YouTube like music videos. It was a lot of like little things like that we would discover together that would get us where we needed to be to get through the day. As the kids got older, it's more about bigger picture things like, who do we want to be as people? Who do we want you to be? Mm-hmm. What are the rules of like engagement with the outside world and curfews and those kinds of things? Again, I think the principle though of having them be part of the process and not just dictating everything has been a key to making it go as well as it can for us, I guess.
Yeah. So it sounds like when they're younger, it's more, you're kind of looking just past your nose. You're like, how do we make it to dinner time? Okay. How do we make it to bedtime? How do we make it out the door in the morning? And then now it's like, well, I've got these kids that are going to launch into the world here in a couple more years. And like, how do I make sure that they're like a whole person, or they're going to like conduct themselves like a young adult outside of the house, which is less about the logistics of bedtime or the morning putting on pants and eating breakfast and brushing teeth, and more like longer term thinking around those kids. Yeah, that's interesting. You and your wife recently started the like Sunday date concept. Yeah, I guess you can do this now because you can just be like, bye kids, we're leaving and don't burn the house down, which we are just getting into in my family, and it is glorious. But what do you guys do on those Sunday dates?
This totally started because after I started 12 Sided Studios and was doing more my availability on the weekend, I was also playing in a lot of games on the weekends for my work. It reached a point where it was obvious that I needed to redirect attention back to my family. What we've sort of gotten into is we go to a local place here, and the first thing we do is take out our calendars on our phones and just sort of go review the upcoming week and be like, you got this covered. Oh, we have this appointment on Thursday. Who's going to do that? Sometimes there'll be things where it's like, oh, Noah needs to be at this place on that day. He's responsible for himself now, but like just texting him while we're sitting there, texting him being like, you need to be at this thing on Thursday, right? We're even texting the kids sometimes now during that date. But that weekly review has done really good. I think it was really annoying to Rachel. We just both live by our calendars, but I wasn't looking far enough ahead. It was really annoying to her to start in the morning, be like, who's handling this thing? Or to have her be like, we talked about that 3 weeks ago. You said you were going to do it. I'm like, I don't remember that.
Can't even remember what I had for dinner last night.
Right. So just sitting down, having a drink together, relaxing for a bit, and doing that weekly review. And then the other thing that tends to happen is we talk about big picture stuff like goals. What do we want to do? Thinking February break, do we want to go away, or what's that going to look like, or those kinds of things. Having time set aside to just talk to each other is nice.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how that time, if you don't book it, almost, where you have two working parents and kids with a lot of activities and stuff, if you don't book it, it just doesn't happen. It just goes away. It gets lost in the day to day, or it's like two ships passing in the night. So I always ask this question to folks, but what is something that you and Rachel don't agree on when it comes to parenting? Where you two have different styles or approaches?
I'm much more relaxed about certain things. And maybe this comes from conflict avoidance. Like if something looks like it's going okay to me, I would rather just let it play out. And she has the natural desire to be much more proactive, like ask questions, make sure that everyone knows what they're doing or that it's going well. Fortunate is that there's not a lot of conflict there about that for us because they're not mutually exclusive. Like if she wants to do that, okay, like that's fine. Like it doesn't really hurt to do that. The other was being a computer programmer, and I started programming when I was 10. So this concept of like screen time and limited computer time was a real, like a touchy thing for me because it's like I literally gained my knowledge of how I've made my career. When I was 10, I cleared out I had a somewhat big closet, not super big, but somewhat big. I cleared everything out and created a little like office for myself in there with a computer that my parents got at a tag sale. And I would just be there for hours copying code out of books, magazines, into typing it in, exploring, learning. And so putting limits around that kind of activity was just like antithetical to everything I believed in for myself and for the kids. Fortunately, we were able to navigate that. And when you actually talk about it, it's easy to pull that apart. There's a difference between mindless, sort of passive using of screens and being creative and doing things, creating things, learning things. That's very different. And so we were able to sort of create those limits too for the kids and communicate that as well.
Yeah, I think I spent many of my formative years in front of a computer, but like kind of hacking away at it and learning stuff. I learned how to type so fast because of text-based MUDs. I don't know if you remember that from Telnet and things like that. And that's why I can type so fast and very accurately.
MUDs is another thing because as a 10, 11, 12, 14-year-old getting onto bulletin board systems, meeting people, playing MUDs with them was very formative for me. And I get it. The world is a little bit different in terms of social media and all those kinds of things. But having had that experience, and at the time, I know a lot of the people that I was chatting with and playing with were adults, and I was a teenager, but that certainly influenced how I thought about how the kids should be interacting with others online.
How do you set the boundaries for your kids now?
Basically, what we've said is that they need to know everyone. Like, if you know somebody in real life, totally okay. If not, then we need to approve that, basically. We need to see it and know about it. That was the sort of framework, the rules we put in place. It's worked for us.
Yeah. We have something very similar in our household. Of course, the big thing in our house is Fortnite. Very important to know who the people are that you can chat with in Fortnite. So how have you defined that like relationship, and how have you talked to the kids about the relationship that you want them to have with technology, especially because it's such a huge part of your professional life, your personal life growing up? Like, how do you talk to them about it?
They were both naturally inquisitive about it, and probably because they saw me doing things on the computer and know that that's what I do for work. And so they're also both a little technically inclined. Noah more than Eden, but both of them, they both are on a robotics team of their own volition. Like, I didn't make them do it. On the weekends, we would program together, but Noah pretty much bounced off of programming and is much more mechanical engineering, especially when it comes to the robot. And so did Eden. They were both exposed to programming because they were curious about it. So the big thing for Eden has been drawing using tablets. So we got them, lessons for Procreate and that kind of thing to be able to draw and make those videos. And that was something as kids that they were super excited about and interested. They made short little movies with them and the neighbors. They would get an iPad and some cameras, make a script and put together costumes and then film. They're not very good, but they were awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Finding those projects and then being there to sort of support them in that, be like, well, maybe you could use this program or those kinds of things. So it's more about just like supporting them in the things that they're trying to do rather than interjecting myself into it.
Yeah. I have a couple more questions for you before we wrap up and do our lightning round. This episode is going to drop about a week or so before Halloween, and I am curious what Halloween looks like for a 14 and a 16-year-old.
Well, first of all, Halloween is like one of my favorite holidays, or like the favorite holiday. For a long time, it was for the kids as well. They loved to decorate the house. Each year, I would give them, it's inflated a little bit now, but when they were smaller, it was, we're going to go to the Halloween store. You each get $10. You get to get one more decoration for the house. That's grown from a thing where we would actually do that together to last year. They were like, we need to decorate the house. And they like did it without me. But last year was the first year that Noah did not go out trick-or-treating. So that 15, 16-year-old mark seems to be the end of that.
Now, did Noah hand out candy or participate in the festivities in some way?
I think he just went over a friend's house
Okay.
For the evening.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
they're both fairly mechanically inclined, so they could probably build some like sets and props and things
Yeah.
as a future thing. We got some pretty elaborate things going on in our neighborhood. So
Yeah. It is fun to see that progression of, there was a sweet spot too, where they were, I guess, 11, 12, 13, where like enjoying Halloween, but being somewhat self-sufficient with it. So that meant like creating costumes with friends. They started to like coordinate costumes with friends. So, we're going to all have the same theme or whatever. And then they would just do it. And then they would also, either we would walk behind them while they were going, or they would go out on their own. We live in a neighborhood where it's not too unreasonable to go out on your own if you're 12 or 13. So
yeah. Now you could just send a drone to follow them
Yeah.
or something like that. So, okay, before we end for lightning round, you have a really great perspective on copying other people, or what I would call like keeping up with the Joneses, I think in both your personal and professional life. So can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think this sort of evolved from a company perspective, but I realized that I do it personally as well, which is I have a tendency, rather than looking to other people, if I'm not sure about how something should be or how it should work at a company or what the policy of something should be, my first instinct isn't to see how other people have done it, but to just say, well, if I were in charge, or if it's for me, how do I think it should be? I think when you do that, you end up in a place which is usually simpler and more genuine to who you are as a person or as a company. And instilling that in your company culture, I think, is very powerful too. And I see it at thoughtbot, where when you empower everybody to say, well, how would I want this to be? Then they're very likely to create a solution or a system that works for the majority of people at the company, that is simpler and genuine, not a lot of bureaucracy. And that's true from everything from the benefits that we have to the way things work. In life, I think that is also valuable. I mean, if you're constantly looking to others, you might not end up with what's right for you or what's simple or what's genuine. And so leveling that up, what I find is that like you can just say, well, how would I want it to be? And then you could be like, okay, I've got that in my mind. Now, what have others done? And it is both educational and valuable if you look at that second and realize what you thought it should be is very different than a lot of other people. Why is that? That's where you crystallize your values, either as a company or as a individual. because you can see then why you chose what you did, and you can understand whether it's important to you or not, rather than just chasing or just doing by default what someone else has done.
Yeah. And there's no shortage of other people dispensing advice and thoughts and things you should do and stuff like that. So,
I mean, we're on a podcast.
We are on a podcast. I make it a point to just ask questions and not dispense advice on this pod, because boy, have I learned. Okay, well, that's a great place to end. Before we go, aside from telling people to tune into giant robots smashing into other giant robots, how can people follow along or be helpful to you?
Yeah, if you are a founder who is working on your idea and you're looking for someone to help refine that idea, figure out how to build not only a great product, but the right product and bring it to market, get in touch at thoughtbot.com. Or if you're a larger company who is struggling with technology, or needs to go faster, or is not moving as fast as you'd like, we also have a team of people that works with existing companies as well. And if you're in the gaming space, or you are a big fan of shows like Critical Role and Dimension 20, that sort of thing, you can check out 12sidedstudios.com.
Okay, cool. We will send people to all of those places for you. Okay, lightning round. What is the most indispensable parenting product that you have ever purchased?
Video baby monitor.
What is the most useless parenting product you've ever purchased?
We bought this carrier that we spent a lot of money on and then never used.
Yep, I've heard that before. True or false? There is only one correct way to load the dishwasher.
True.
And whose way is that in your household?
My way.
Okay. What is your signature dad superpower?
Being relaxed.
Okay. That's a good one. What is the crazier block of time in your house? 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. or 6 p.m. to 8 p.m.?
Morning time.
Okay. The ideal day with your kids involves what one activity?
I think playing a game.
Okay. If either of your kids had to describe you in a single word, what would it be?
I would hope that they would say reasonable.
It's funny how this evolves as the kids get older. Like when I talk to dads who have like really young kids, they're like silly, funny, goofy, friendly, and then now it's reasonable. I love that. What would your kids say is the most embarrassing thing that you've ever done in front of them?
They've both been in plays before, and they've both been very embarrassed by like just us being in the audience.
Just your mere presence.
Right, just our mere presence.
Okay. What is your go-to dad wardrobe?
I'm not wearing one right now, but it's usually a polo shirt and shorts.
Okay. How many dad jokes do you tell on average in a given day?
I think I have to give myself one.
You have a daily allotment.
Right.
Okay, I love that. What is your favorite kids movie?
Wall-E.
Okay, yeah. Was there a nostalgic movie that you just couldn't wait to force your kids to watch with you?
So the first one was definitely Star Wars. It turns out that the second one, and I didn't realize this until it came up, was Monty Python's Holy Grail.
Yeah. Yeah.
We had to wait a little bit before that they were old enough for that one. But the best thing about it was both my wife and I were excited to have the kids watch it. They watched it and they both liked it.
Oh, good. Impressive. It still holds up. This is good. This is good. Okay. How often do you tell your kids back in my day stories?
Actually, it comes up more now than it did then. And I think it's because they're out in the world and experiencing things now. And some things are very different than they were 30 years ago.
Yeah. Do you have a go-to back in my day story that comes up regularly?
The big thing has been phones and communication because it's just so different than what it was when we were kids.
Yeah. Okay. And finally, what is your take on minivans?
Minivans are great. We avoided getting one philosophically for way too long.
Yeah. But now you have one.
Now we have one, and it's awesome.
You strike me as the kind of guy that would really appreciate the utility of a minivan. The engineer in you would really like that.
They don't make it anymore, but it was a Kia Rondo, which is essentially a minivan, but with doors that don't slide.
Oh, okay.
And a little bit smaller.
Okay.
And once we got a minivan, we were like, oh, we were so stupid. Like, doors that slide open are so much better.
I was going to say you got the worst of all worlds with that first purchase. No,
exactly.
You got the embarrassment of the minivan, but then none of the utility of the sliding doors. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, good thing the Kia Rondo is no longer in business. There's probably a reason for that too.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, Chad, it was my absolute pleasure having you on the show today. Thank you so much for joining me and spilling the tea about your life and having some teenagers. And I wish you and your family all the best of luck for the rest of the year.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me, and it was a blast.
Thank you for listening to today's episode with Chad Pytel. You can subscribe and watch the show on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit www.startupdadpod.com to learn more and browse past episodes. Thanks for listening. See you next week.